Morning Combat back in the studio where we belong. Luke, Thomas, Brian Campbell. And Luke, the MK doesn't typically take requests. But I do hear one thing from our fans often. We need more one championship content.
Say that. Yes.
So why don't we deliver with a little ace up the sleeve dad joke? Let's welcome him on in, the vice president of One Championships, the Hall of Famer, the former middleweight champion of the damn world, Rich Franklin in the building today.
I love the play on ace up the sleeve. What's going on today, guys?
Yeah, because you're around our age, Rich. That's why you get it, okay? You lose your ability to craft good jokes at this age. Great to see you, sir. You've been doing great work with One Championship, and it's obviously a fertile time for the promotion with the launch, the announcement of the Amazon Prime deal, and the continued tease toward a U.S. takeover. So, Rich, let's start right here with you, brother. You've been with this company since 2014. You've seen it being built globally from the ground up. How big is this Amazon Prime deal for what you guys plan to do moving forward?
Oh, this is big for us. It's the first step. You know, I've been with the company since 2014. I worked remotely for the company from the U.S. initially. Then I moved down to Singapore for several years. I relocated back here with a team of people in the United States again to work on this U.S. expansion. And so we dipped our toe last year. We're coming in. We have this Amazon deal this year. And this is a big deal because Amazon, as I like to call it, it's kind of regionally agnostic in a sense that it's, if you have Amazon, you have Amazon Prime, you can pretty much get the fights anywhere globally.
Rich, walk us through the deal. So as I understand it, there'll be 12 fights per calendar year, which is interesting. But beyond that, beyond just the details of the streaming, what does it mean for a One Championship event stateside?
So we will be broadcasting the 12 events that we're doing on Amazon Prime in U.S. primetime hours, but we will also be conducting other events for the primetime hours in Asia as well. So this is going to create a situation for One Championship where we have a double schedule. But eventually this is going to lead to us being on ground in the U.S. probably Q1, possibly Q2 of next year.
Okay, but is there an idea like, walk me through the vision that one has for a footprint in the U.S. marketplace? Because as you know, it's very different than 2014, right? PFL has made a lot of noise. Bellator is certainly still around here. These are predominantly North American promotions, even though Bellator, for example, is in Paris this upcoming weekend. Still, what does it look like from one's perspective to have a real U.S. presence?
Well, what we're doing internally in the company is we're looking at how we're going to conduct the events or where we're going to conduct the events. We have several locations at this point in time where our global rule set is approved. And we would look at possibly next year doing several shows in U.S. territory and as well broadcasting some of those shows from the Asian market as well. Keep in mind that on the other side of the planet, things are just now starting to open up with lockdowns, quarantines, COVID protocols, vaccination status, traveling to and from countries. So one is just now getting to the point where we're starting to open back up commercially, traveling again. Everything that we've done up to this point in time has been in Singapore. So this will be the expansion next year. We'll come into the U.S. looking at doing probably somewhere between 4 and 6 shows on ground in the United States. And then I would imagine in 2024, we will be looking at doing all 12 of those shows on ground in the U.S.
Rich, MMA fans certainly know you guys. A lot of our fans love you guys, whether it's your MMA, obviously there's Muay Thai, there's all different disciplines of martial arts. But as it pertains to a U.S. expansion, you're going to have an opportunity, obviously, to open yourself up to so many casual American sports fans. What do you hope the hook will be of why they can look at this product and say, okay, I know what I get from UFC, Bellator, whoever else, but there's something different here?
Yeah, I think that the differentiation in our product is obvious for anybody who's familiar with the product. First of all, we started doing the Muay Thai matches, the kickboxing matches. So it's not just a mixed martial arts event. You'll see grappling matches as well. And just as a fan of mixed martial arts and someone who used to, do that professionally, when our organization started talking about doing Muay Thai matches, I sat there and I was in these meetings and like, why would somebody come to an MMA match to watch Muay Thai? And we put on our first event. I was a naysayer. I didn't like the idea of it. And then we had our first event with some Muay Thai matches, some kickboxing matches. And our Muay Thai matches, they're done in the 4-ounce MMA style gloves, which makes for interesting fights. And needless to say, after we had our first event, I sat there and I was like, man, these are really good fights. And I don't want to admit it, but I was like, I actually like this. So now I've gotten to the point where I really look forward to these things. I think that we do a great job with our Muay Thai matchups. We've had the hybrid match that we did with Rodtang and Demetrius Johnson. For the listeners that are familiar with that match, for those who are not, it was a hybrid match where we had one of our Muay Thai champs fight Demetrius Johnson, and the first round was a Muay Thai round. The second round was an MMA round. Third round Muay Thai. Fourth round MMA. It only made it to the second round. But on top of that, with the One Super Series, those matches that we do with the Muay Thai and kickboxing, we also had some really interesting grappling matchups that we put in the organization. I think we've done a great job with that. Our last one with Mike Musumeci and Imanari was a really interesting match, and we've done a really good job of matching these so that they make exciting, grappling competition. And so I think the mixture of this sport, plus with our global rule set, I really like the way, as someone who competed in this sport, as well as somebody who's working on this side of things, the way that we judge the fights, the way that we score the fights, we don't use a 10-point must system. We don't judge round by round. We look at the fight in its entirety, and it's basically a cumulative score. And essentially at the end of the match, you pick a winner based on the criteria. And so you don't have this idea of stealing matches. But with the judging criteria we use and the way the system is tiered up and how the system by which you're judged pushes you to finish fights. So we have really high finishing rates. So when you look at the product, just from the competition standpoint, there's obvious and apparent differences. Then you can get into the whole entertainment side of things, and that's a whole different discussion. I could go down that path if you wanted to as well.
So this is one of my, I do have some criticisms of one, but one of my favorite parts about one is I actually really like the rule set. But the problem is, of course, the athletic commissions may or may not. To what extent have you found athletic commissions, particularly in the major states, New Jersey, California, wherever you guys are looking to do business, how receptive are they to something outside of the confines of the 10-point must system?
Many of the athletic commissions are. I think that for states like California and New York, there's going to be some work that needs to be done to that. But nonetheless, at least the conversations that I've had with the states that I've sat down with are very receptive, including I sat down with New York, and they said, we get it, but they're not a pioneer in that sense that they're not the kind of state that's going to first, certify our rule set. So there will be some work that needs to be done there. But no, we have several states that have already approved and sanctioned the rule set and places that we can go. And
I think Colorado was one, if I'm not mistaken.
Colorado was the first one, correct? Yes.
Yeah, they'll legalize anything, Luke. Okay?
Yes, they certainly will. They certainly will.
Bare knuckle fighting, marijuana, whatever you got to get done there.
But when you look at the rule set, there are positives and negatives to the rule set as from the U.S. perspective, right? I mean, obviously the main competitive difference, the pink elephant in the room, is the knees that are allowed on the ground. There were many people, even though we say this in every single broadcast, that were surprised by the fact that Demetrius Johnson lost essentially to a knee to the head on the ground against Adriano Moraes, and it still kind of surprises people. I would argue from a competitive standpoint, that you can't really generate more power on the ground with a knee than you could standing up. As a matter of fact, I would actually argue that I could generate more power with my knee standing up, hitting somebody with the head, than I could on the ground. So when you look at a rule like that, that is the major competitive difference that you would see. Aside from that, you have judging differences. I prefer our judging system. I prefer our scoring system over the 10-point must system.
Let me stop you there, because so this is a big thing for me too. I actually love one's judging system. But for the skeptics out there, or the people, maybe not even skeptics, it's people who are just used to the 10-point must system, give me your best assessment of why the one system, or the old Pride system, they're actually pretty similar, why that one yields better results.
Well, let me ask you this. On the 10-point must system, what criteria is used to award one fighter 10 and another fighter less than 10?
Damage, or effective grappling, or effective striking?
Okay, so we have these kind of categories. So we have 5 different categories that are in ascending order, starting with aggression, and then we have takedown, defense, grappling, and striking, which are kind of even categories depending on where you want to take the fight. And then we have damage. Our damage is broken down into 3 categories: superficial, cumulative, or internal. And then the final category is near KO. And they're weighted in the order that I just gave them, from least important to most important. You can be aggressive in a match, but you have to be effectively aggressive by landing strikes. And if you're landing strikes, then the more strikes you land, the more damage you do. And you start scoring on these higher categories. in the end, if you want to think of it this way, just for simplification purposes, we in essence use a 10-point must system. It's just one round. We just take everything, and at the end, we look at it and say, hey, one person won and one person didn't win. And we use our judging criteria. So it's really not that much different. The difference is that you don't do it on a round-by-round basis. So when you run into a situation in a 3-round fight where one guy edges out round 1 and round 2, and then the other guy just completely blows away round 3, but ends up losing. He doesn't score a 10-8 in that round, but ends up losing a 2-round-to-1 decision. It's like, is that really how the fight should have been scored? And we've seen these kind of lopsided fights that happen this way. So if you took the entire 15 minutes in its entirety and said, hey, here's our judging criteria, and at the end of this thing, we use this judging criteria, we keep track of things on our scorecards, and we award a winner based on this criteria. In essence, you're kind of, if you think of it that way, giving one person 10 and another person 9.
I can't argue with that. I really
do.
can't.
I legitimately love the system. I think it gets much better results.
Rich, we're so into the ongoing growth of this sport that's really not even 30 years old, at least as it pertains to being a major American sport, that we see now more tweaking of the rules. We see one using a different weight dehydration system than others. We see PFL adding a season and playoffs. Do you ever look at what you see on a promotion by promotion basis and think we're still in the dark ages of trying to figure out what are the best laid rules to do this sport correctly?
Not the best laid rules. I'll say this. Sometimes I think we're still in the dark ages. And the reason why is because when I was competing, I remember at the time when I was getting ready to become a coach on The Ultimate Fighter, and the state of mixed martial arts in the United States at that time, keep in mind, we had just come out of an era where we were still banned in like 48 of the states. I mean, this was within my career. I can remember my first amateur fight and fighting in Indiana, and there was no athletic commission at the time, and no real athletic commission to regulate MMA. And we had come from that. And when there was talk about, for example, me becoming a household name, I was like, this is mixed martial arts. Like, look at our history. And now you see what's happened in the US and how the growth of this thing is. And you look at the growth of the sport internationally, just combat sports in general. And you look at one championship, like we just had a Nielsen report that showed our digital footprint that shows us in the top 10, like within the time that we've been in business since 2011, we're within the top 10 of sports media properties of performance, like engagement on socials, total number of views and things of that nature. And so when I look at these kinds of things, the work that we're doing on the other side of the planet has been essentially what was happening here in the US years ago. And we've pretty much embedded one championship as a household name there. And now we're just essentially coming to the US. And like I said, the things like the Nielsen report show that, and it shows our digital footprint. And we're going to end up doing the same thing here in the US. As far as the rule set goes, there's always going to be debate and preferences. I particularly really like our scoring system. I particularly really like our hydration system. We're at a point in time when you talk about dark ages that I think to myself, like, I can't believe that there are still organizations in this world that are not using a hydration system the way that we do. Something, if not our system, something similar to it. And I could go into detail as to how we do that, but it's much healthier for the opponent, or for the combatants. I mean, from concussion standpoints. And so when you take those kinds of things into consideration, then you get into nuances of the rules. I mean, can somebody knee to the head on the ground? Should elbows be legal or illegal because they cut people? And you have these little debates on things. And, I think we've settled out. But here in the US, we've gotten to the point where we're so comfortable with a particular rule set that the moment that something comes in to kind of challenge that, we've closed ourselves in this box and said, like, well, man, knees to the head on the ground are dangerous. It's like, well, show me some data on that. Prove it to me. And I would be willing to, do impact tests to prove the data otherwise and stake the claim that it's not as dangerous. So when I look at our rule set, I like our rule set. There's been a lot of thought and development that's gone into that. Matt Hume is our matchmaker, and he's worked diligently on this. I've helped in areas and on the competition side of things, and I think we've settled out really well. Will there always be debates on things and things that can be changed and improvements to systems? Yeah, I mean, that's how things go. The first car that was invented obviously was not nearly as advanced as the truck that I have in my driveway. So there will always be improvements that are made to things. But yeah, I think there's room for growth, but I think we've settled out at a spot where, we have a good projected future on this stuff.
Rich, let's go back to the weigh-ins. Like in theory, I certainly have no issue with the way that one does it. And partly there was a tragic incident years ago, and there was this big reformation. Everyone moves up. We're going to do hydration testing. In theory, I have no problem with any of that. I guess my issue with one on that consideration though would be transparency. For a long time, weigh-ins were never showed, and even when they were showed recently, 8 people failed on the hydration test for the early part of it, and there was no visual evidence that they re-weighed in for the public to see to make sure that they actually did it according to the rules and by the book. And so what are one's plans to have better transparency along lines where, I mean, you know as well as I do, making sure that people weigh in or that they have safe weigh-ins, whatever that you want to call that, that should be for the public to see, no?
It should be, but keep in mind, there's a couple things going on here. For example, in Singapore right now, there are COVID protocols. There have been COVID protocols in place. So you can only have so many people in one room at one time. Now, I don't want to make excuses for things and try to sound like I'm ducking the question here. But these kinds of things do happen. There is an appointed time for people to weigh in so that it is televised and transparent to the public. But in the event that you don't make weigh-ins at that point in time, if you miss the hydration test, because the way that our system runs is that you arrive 2 days before the fight. You have to make weight and hydration simultaneously. 1 day before the fight, you have to make weight and hydration simultaneously. If you do that, then you're free and clear and you fight. If not, if you miss weight or hydration, you have to repeat the process on fight day. Now, if that happens, for example, it is difficult for us to, for example, broadcast something like that. However, the opposing camps do have the ability to have a representative from their, like if I'm fighting somebody, I have the ability to put a representative from my camp at the weigh-in and hydration to make sure that the person weighing in is hydrated and on weight simultaneously as they should be. So there is transparency within, if it's not televised to the public, there's at least transparency within the organization amongst the fighters. They all have the ability to have a representative there to have somebody witness that. And so that's the way that goes down. Now, just to explain the system, how a catch weight happens is that if you do not make hydration, you cannot fight. We do not allow our athletes to compete dehydrated. And we use an instrument called a refractometer to test the specific gravity of urine. It sounds really scientific. I sound really smart saying that, but it sounds way more complex than it is. But we basically test the hydration status of the urine. If you're not hydrated, you can't fight. If you miss weight, but you are hydrated, then a catch weight can be negotiated with your opponent, but the opponent has to accept the catch weight. And there are limits by which you could be over. So for example, if I sign a contract to fight at 185 pounds and I come walking in at 210 and say, oh, but I'm hydrated. Well, there's too much of a discrepancy there to sign that match. So we do have limits by which you can't exceed that upper limit.
Yeah, fair enough. My only point is that in the States, as you well know, competing here and being so decorated, that the commission acts as a representative for the public. And if that's not there, of course, if you come to the States, there will be. But you know what I'm saying? If that element is not there, we have no way of verifying any of this. We just have to take your word for it. And so I just feel like if one wants to take the next step, that gap has to be bridged. If you want to watch
the urination test done on air, that's
that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I think more efforts at transparency are probably in order.
Yeah, I'll just say this: the organization has done. Some of the countries that we travel to, like Cambodia, for example, there is no organization in Cambodia. It has to be somewhat internally regulated, but I mean, keep in mind, other organizations, when they go to a market for the first time or first several times, they're in essence internally regulating as well. They have to, because the system isn't there. So, if somebody like the UFC or the PFL or Bellator wants to go to a market in South Africa and they don't have a commission there, then they, in essence, have to bring their own people to regulate these things. There's no other way to do it. True. And so whether they're hiring doctors externally, which is what we do, but there has to be some form of regulation. And so here in the United States, those systems are in place, and we're prepared to meet the criteria of those systems. Obviously, even a state like Colorado, like you guys made a joke about Colorado legalizing anything at the top of the hour here, they are still going to have standards by which we need to operate and incorporate the State Athletic Commission. Like, we won't be able to just come in and run this show.
Right.
Rich, I know the pandemic slowed a a lot of the best laid plans of everyone's life, and the U.S. expansion for one being part of that, although good news to hear you guys are back on the road to making this happen. But before that, the signing of Demetrious Johnson, Eddie Alvarez, Sage Northcutt at the time, was a big deal to grab the attention of North American fans. How big is the same level of free agent pursuance in one's future? How big will that be as it pertains to the U.S. launch too? I mean, it's not that you don't have fighters we already know across the board, and the ones we don't, we're learning as we go. But in terms of making those big splashes like you once did.
I think it's a big deal. And to say that when we brought guys like DJ and Eddie into the organization, Sage, all the U.S. athletes that we signed, that was kind of an eye turner for a lot of the fans. Like, wait a minute, who is this organization? And I think that when you look at athletes like Eddie coming into the organization, his match on TNT against Okray Yoon suddenly made people realize, like, wait a minute, who are some of these guys? Demetrious Johnson came in and did the Grand Prix, won our Grand Prix, but at the same time, it showed that we have some tough competition in that weight class. Ultimately, he ends up fighting for the title against Adriano Moraes, and suddenly people are like, whoa, wait a minute, who's this Adriano Moraes? And so when you look at the athletes that we have, I think it's done a couple things. Number one, it's made some stars out of the athletes that we have on that side of the planet. But at the same time, also it made stars by saying, what I should say is, people know that the athletes that we have in one championship are on the level. But at the same time, we're here in the U.S. and we're currently recruiting in the U.S. and we'll continue to be recruiting in the U.S. so that we are capturing the U.S. eyeballs and interest. But we have some other athletes like Rodtang. I don't know if you guys saw the Rodtang matchup with Daniel Williams. I mean, how can you not love that guy? His fight style, like, immediately U.S. fans started gravitating towards him, which is, I guess part of the reason why he and Demetrious Johnson ended up in that matchup as well. But I think Rodtang has the potential to be an international star, as well as several other athletes that we have from the roster that Americans will come to know. But yeah, we will be recruiting heavily here in the stateside.
How much does your recruitment angle look at the current state of fighter pay in the mixed martial arts as a whole? But really, let's be fair, specifically with the headlines we see coming out of the UFC, at least in the American media, we talk about the dark ages. Lack of unionization, low fees for fighters risking their lives compared to other combat sports.
No federal protections.
No federal protections. How much do you hope one could be attractive to certain fighters in that regard? So it's not the end of their career they're coming. It's more like you talked about, signing Demetrious Johnson when he still has it, but giving fighters another potential avenue.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack on this question here because you kind of had so many things there. So when it comes to competitive pay, obviously that's something that we're on the level with other major organizations in the world, because realistically now, unlike when I was competing in the UFC at the time, that was the only show in town. So you didn't have negotiating ability, and now athletes have to have negotiating ability, or they have negotiating ability, which in essence gives the athletes more power. So they can negotiate with these organizations. And if they're not getting the kind of pay that they want from one organization, they have the ability to go to another organization. So I think that that's definitely going to affect the free agency market moving forward tremendously. And athletes are, because look, as an athlete, I mean, I say this all the time. I went to college to be a high school teacher, and I taught full-time for 4 years before I actually decided to retire from teaching and pursue competition. In competition, I made way more money than I ever would have made as a teacher. Would I have been upset if somebody added a decimal place to my paycheck? Not at all. Were we paid like athletes say, like a professional basketball player? No, not at all. So it wouldn't hurt my feelings, but I made way better money than I would have made as a teacher. I knew the inherent risks when I got into the sport. The one thing that I would like to see personally as this sport develops down the road is things like medical and pension plans for tenured athletes, like guys who have been in organizations. That would be great. But with all that being said, the free agency market is going to push for all those things. Like it will come at this point in time because athletes now have negotiating ability, and one championship will be and needs to be, and as is on the level of every other major organization on the planet with that.
Well, we once saw Luke do a very interesting trade, Demetrious Johnson kind of for Ben Askren, and I think we kind of know who won that. If one is still interested in trades, I'm thinking Morning Combat and One you trade me to Singapore, you come to Morning Combat, you take my seat here for a couple weeks, and I join season 2 of the Apprentice One Championship Edition, because Chatri, I'm coming for that 250K, brother, all right? You in on this, Rich?
Listen, let me tell you, man, just make sure that your head is in the right space if you want to work underneath Chatri. That's all I got to say, because
Rich,
albeit a good boss, he's a tough boss.
You're saying I'm fired episode 1. That's what you're saying. I know.
You're fired.
No, you might make it. Like, what is that? It's a 12-episode season. I'll give you to episode 4.
No, that's not bad.
That's not bad.
Third of the way through.
Well,
hey, Rich, I would love to pick your brain on this. So we could talk fighter pay, but let's skip that for just a second and focus in on Francis Ngannou might box Tyson Fury. Now, you know as well as I do, like MMA fighters trying to box boxers, you know, we know how this movie is going to end. But Tyson Fury is a showman, and he has actually vocally entertained the idea he would be in favor of some rule adjustments in order to make it more palatable.
4-ounce gloves.
Right. Dude, sell me on that. How different would that fight be with 4-ounce gloves? I still would favor Tyson Fury, but how much does that change the equation?
Yeah, listen, for an MMA athlete to step into boxing, I mean, you go back to Mayweather and McGregor. You know, there were a lot of people that bought into the hype of that actually thought that McGregor could win that match. And anybody that's like me going from MMA and saying, oh, I want to suddenly be a baseball player. It's a completely different sport. Yeah, they're combative, but they're different sports. I work out at a box. I've worked out at a boxing gym my entire career, trained with legit boxers. Guy here from Cincinnati who's cruiserweight, Rave Springs. And let me tell you, when you're in the ring with guys on that level, it's a completely different story. Now, can the 4-ounce gloves be a game changer? Yeah. Can Tyson Fury take a punch? Yeah. He's a heavyweight boxer. He's been getting hit his entire life. It will change the game in the sense that he'll have to get used to the amount of coverage that a glove gives, and defensively that might change things for him. Does Ngannou have a puncher's chance? Absolutely. I mean, that guy hits like a hammer, but at the end of the day, this is going to come down to efficiency and breathing and nervous system and relaxation and everything that comes with that. Like, there is an efficiency of motion. And if you go back and you look at McGregor and Mayweather, and you can see McGregor just slowly, the technique's starting to fall apart. So it's a same thing that happens to me when I go running. I can run and I look good running for, half a mile or a mile. But then as I start to fatigue, my running form starts to fall apart. And if I'm running next to a good runner, it becomes very evident that I'm not a good runner. If I'm running by myself, you're like, oh, this guy's an athlete. But when you run next to a runner, people can tell, and it's the same thing. So, you know, my money would still be on Tyson on a match like that. But all that being said, if we're actually, you know, modifying the rules and there's a bit more leeway, and let's say that Ngannou is, for example, allowed to utilize the clinch and dirty box, and we're going to manipulate rules a little bit more like that, now this changes the game. Right. But if you're just looking at straight up boxing for boxing and we're just switching out gloves, they can do that to entice the public to believe like, oh, yeah, I actually believe this, and people will buy the pay-per-view. But at the end of the day, like Fury will end up catching. I mean, like I said, anybody's got a puncher's chance, but it's difficult. So unless they actually do some other rule modifications that change the dynamic of boxing, then I don't see how. But even if they did that, it's like, well, how do you manipulate the rules? And, you know, now you got to go through commission approvals and whatnot, because it's not boxing and it's not MMA. And so what is it, you know?
Rich, you've been incredibly generous with your time here, but when we get a legend, you know, we got to play the greatest hits. And obviously, you know, I'd love to fanboy out and ask you about knocking out Chuck Liddell with a damn broken arm. But I looked up and down your resume, and I'm a little bit more interested in 2008 when you starred in the film. Sorry. Cyborg Soldier opposite Tiffany Amber Thiessen of Saved by the Bell fame. I mean, Rich, Kelly Kapowski still matters in my household, brother. What do you got for me here? Should we do this offline?
Well, first of all, you know, the politics in Hollywood, I was passed up on an Oscar there. And, you know, it just goes to show that politics exist in every industry, right? You know, but let me tell you, Tiffany, she's an awesome girl. And I was completely like, first of all, my manager comes to me and says, hey, would you be interested in doing some acting? And I was like, yeah, sure, you know. And I thought, like, I don't know, I would do a cameo appearance as like a night security guy at a bar or something, like, hey, can I see your ID? like a one line or something, and they bring me this movie script, and I'm pretty much the main character in the movie opposite of her. And so, needless to say, I was nervous. It was intimidating. It was my first foray into acting. I did as much study as I could at the time. And she was just awesome working with somebody like me, because I can't imagine her being on set thinking like, why do they bring me these amateurs? Because obviously that is not my forte. But all in all, I was happy with my performance for my first acting gig. I subsequently, after that, did a bunch of acting lessons, decided that industry was not for me. I think I was a little bitter that I was passed up on the Oscar. Maybe I should have slapped somebody on stage or something like that. Yeah. That would have, helped me campaign for one. But all that is to say, no, I had a really good time, and she's a professional, extremely talented, and fun to work with, man.
Love it. All right, let's close with business here. You are the vice president of One Championship. Back May 20th. Won 157, and here's the cool part: the Muay Thai World Grand Prix flyweights, gonna get center stage here. We looked up and down the names, a couple jumping out to Luke because
Boucher's on this, plus the Ruotolo brothers, which is very exciting for American Jiu-Jitsu fans.
What can we expect here? Fireworks, Rich?
Dude, I'll tell you what, I'm excited about the Boucher fight. I'm excited about the Ruotolo brothers. And, this goes back to the comment that I made before about us finding these good grappling matchups that come onto the card. And, I would say right now, particularly in the grappling world, the grapplers in One Championship are probably the best paid grapplers in the world at this point in time. But yeah, I've been excited to see Buchecha back. I'm, as a fan, I'm sitting here wanting Buchecha to get these wins because I want to see him in the title mix-up here coming in the future, because Arjun Buller, all the contract stuff that we had going on with him has now been settled. He's back in the mix of things. He'll be coming back in later this year. We have the interim champ Anatoly Malyukin, who is, I really like watching Anatoly. Like we have a good mix of heavyweights at this point in time. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with Buchecha after this, and how he starts mixing himself into the heavyweight title hunt.
He's a damn legend, Luke.
Fat cheeks is what it means.
I bet he could still whoop a little ass on the senior circuit, okay? If you crossed him the wrong way, okay?
Yeah, hey, Rich, last thing on this, has anyone been like, hey, what's it going to get you to get out of retirement? We want you to do one more boxing fight or whatever.
We need you to box Jake Paul, Rich, okay? Can you?
Can you go knock out Jake Paul, please?
I don't think Jake Paul and I are in the same weight class. I'm walking around right now somewhere between 220, 225, which is a little higher than my competition weight, but I don't know if you guys see the stuff that I post on socials. I keep myself in really good shape, obviously. So still training. I actually finished a training session this morning before I jumped on with you guys today. So I would be open to a fun matchup like that. It would be good, boxing matchup or something. And so we've had some kind of preliminary fun little talks with different people, but nothing that's really nothing serious, I'll say that. But yeah, I feel good, honestly, and I think I don't know, maybe I'm dumb, but I still feel like I haven't lost my spring, I haven't lost my reaction times and my agility and speed yet.
No gray hair either, Luke. Okay, you could take some lessons.
He didn't lose a tan. I can see that.
Yeah, there it is.
That tan is all there.
This is me staying out of the sun right now. I don't know. I guess I got quite a bit of Native American blood in me, so I tan fast, but I pale fast as well.
There he is, a true warrior, Rich Franklin. Thank you for your time, sir. The vice president of One Championships, the Hall of Famer, one of my favorite fights. I mean, this guy pulled off pink clothes in the octagon. Okay?
Pink and brown.
This guy's fantastic. Rich, thank you, sir. Good, best of luck to you guys.
Thank you, guys. Hey, and I pull off pink clothes on the street as well.